All right, guys, welcome back to the Buck Fever podcast. We have another really cool episode for you today. We have another buck that hit the dirt, and this time it was a little bit closer to home for us. So we have a guest here tonight that is pretty special. My dad is joining us, Brandon Switz. So first things first, Dad, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing great, son. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I am well. I actually just got done with the next portion of editing the video on this awesome story. Just to take a break here to recap it on this podcast and then go back to editing it some more. So I am all in on this story tonight.
That sounds good, and I can't wait for that video to come out. I'm playing it all through my mind, and the footage that we were able to get, and uh, really looking forward to seeing how that turns out.
It's really cool just the way that I've kind of looked at it now and I've got everything laid out and just some of the things that we had said in some of the interviews that we did leading up to it, obviously not knowing that you were going to shoot that buck, just kind of some of the things that we said of like, oh, he showed up last night and just some of those exchanges that we had where looking back on it now, it's like, oh, that's pretty cool that we ended up shooting him because it really ties everything in with that video. So it's going to be a really cool one.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Yeah, me neither. So that'll be out the Monday at 5 o'clock following this podcast episode. But we wanted to do a recap of the story with all the details, some of the things that happened behind the scenes, because no matter how much you film and whatever, you just can't really get the full story in the scope of one video. So when that comes out, it's going to be really cool to watch, and you definitely should. But tonight, we're going to preview it by really telling the full story and kind of getting into things here. So I'll let you kick it off, but I know we've obviously been talking about it, and the two of us pretty much lived the full story, but it really started a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't even know for sure how many years ago it started, but we were just really lucky enough to have a place on private land that we could get started in the hunting and getting going. And we it was never anything really special. It was not a lot of work put into to making it quality deer habitat. And going back a couple of years is when you um, and obviously the rest of us started to think about what we could do on the property to try to make it a higher quality spot to get deer. So it was a lot of thought that went into it, and we looked at cutting out various shooting lanes. Think about the spot where I was able to harvest that deer, and that started with making a spot for your brother to be able to gun hunt from, or so you could have a little bit more time to see, make kind of a funnel to come through there. And so really that was the start of it in that one particular spot. But um, it's really gone on from there. We added food plots in there that you personally seeded by hand, and put lime down by hand here this summer, and um, picking out the right food plot products to put in there. And um, going into where that buck came in for me, he was heading to a water hole that you with a by hand and a shovel on a hot day, dug that sucker out by yourself, um, and got that thing placed in there. So and that's just a little bit of what's been done over the last couple of years.
Right. I mean, if you took it all the way back, when I was little, deer season was pretty much gun season. That's kind of what we did. And we didn't really
Yeah.
bow hunt much. And then one day Ben, being the kid that he was and still is, he just decided he wanted to get a bow. So I remember you guys got him, one of those real youth bows. It's not a hunting bow at all, but he had that and started shooting. And then I ended up being able to borrow a Matthews Genesis, which by today's standards is probably not even a legal bow to be hunting with, but it's actually the one deer that I've shot with a bow was with that Matthews Genesis at like 5 yards, almost point blank. So, um, yeah, I mean, really, like you said, over the past couple of years, we've had to almost teach ourselves a lot of the bow hunting aspect of things, being that it's much more close quarters combat than it is with a gun. So, putting stands in the right places and hunting the wind. I mean, hunting the wind, I think, is really, if you look at that, that would probably be the true ethos of when things really started to ramp up for us, because we really only had, one stand for each of us, and we just picked our spots. And then whatever weekend we were hunting, it didn't matter what wind direction was. We didn't really think about it that much. That's just where we hunted. And that's kind of what it was for a while there.
Yeah, yeah, for quite a while. And and to be honest, it doesn't really matter what stand you're in, and which way the wind's blowing. You will have an opportunity for deer to come in upwind of you, typically. Um, but having the ability to say, hey, I think the deer are going to be coming from this direction, so we're going to be more mindful about where we sit, so we're not going to have those deer smell us 100 yards away and not come into any of the stands has been critical in being able to have more interactions with deer and in situations that we might be able to harvest them from. So multiple stand sites, and even where even where we're going to put the stands, still took a lot of work. Whether it involves setting up licking branches in specific places, or digging water holes, um, or using funnels where the deer are typically coming in from, and even the stand that I used to harvest this buck has a much better tree stand setup. It was designed, for bow hunting to be hunted from a tree stand, and the wind was not right for that stand on that day, but we were lucky enough to have a gun stand that was close enough, where we could utilize the wind and ultimately be successful on that day.
Right. That's a funnel with a water hole, so it's a really, really hot spot. You're definitely going to see a lot of deer there. And like you said, that we have a tree stand that's set up 20, 25 yards from the water hole that's perfect for a north wind. Even northwest, northeast, anything like that is going to work. And we had wind basically out of the due south. So,
Yeah.
and then we have that gun stand that's set up perfectly for that wind to be able to hunt there. And it's kind of that, gun crossbow hybrid where it's 45, 50 yards to the water hole. So it's doable for, any of that stuff. But just a regular compound bow isn't going to work. But yeah, I mean, I think back, like, even to, I want to say that would have been 3 years ago now, the encounters that I had with Albert in that stand by the pond there. And he would come out back to back weeks, just back to back to back. He'd come out in that same spot and kind of take the same path. And I just remember being like, man, I wish I could just be like 60 yards over that direction and he'd be a dead deer right now. And I think that really is when we kicked off the idea of getting a couple more tree stands and really figuring out, okay, well, why was he traveling in that area? What was so special about that? Oh, it turns out that there's basically a highway of a trail that runs right through there. Let's get a stand on that and, set it up for a certain wind. And then we kind of expanded beyond that and expanded our trail camera repertoire. over the past couple of years. So it really has been a multi-year process of just really learning the property. Even though it is a small property, it's like 16 acres of woods, and just opening it up and hunting in areas that we never hunted in and really learning the property has given us a lot more opportunities over the past couple of years.
For sure. And plenty of that comes with, the cellular cameras or the trail cameras that are out there. Um, and honestly, it was, it kind of went from us thinking about where we wanted to be to having the deer tell us or show us where we need to be in order to be successful.
Yeah, I know. Like when we first set up a couple of them, it was kind of like, you know, I had picked out certain trees, and you'd be like, really, that's the tree you want to be in? Like you have basically like one shot out of this thing. And, some of our best stands are those ones where you only get like one shooting lane. That's the spot. If you're going to shoot a deer, that's where it's going to be. But those end up being like some of our best stands because we're just so well hidden. We can hunt it on a certain wind that we know they're really not going to get behind us. And, it's really worked to our advantage now.
So far, so far, well, it's certainly trending in the right direction. I mean, we would go, there were quite a few years in there where, from the time you started hunting to now, where, first of all, we didn't have a bunch of cameras out there, and we didn't really see many bucks of any quality that were coming through, in those stands, and once we're able to start to make some changes and get some more information on them and improve the land with food plots and other things that all of those things together are now leading to where we're starting to see quality bucks show up on our cameras, and then obviously a decent buck that came in for me last weekend. So the fruits of the labor are finally starting to show.
Yeah, it's definitely been a work in progress, and it's gotten gradually better year after year. I mean, I think the last time I shot a deer was 6 years ago. The last time you had shot a deer up until last weekend was 8 years ago, which was another buck, kind of in that same area. It wasn't out of that stand. We hadn't built that gun stand yet, so it must have been like a ground blind or something out of that same area. But
Yep.
yeah,
Ground blind, probably 20 yards south of where the current gun stand is. So
right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's been a hot spot, and I feel like the first buck that Ben shot was out of that same area also.
Yep, that certainly was.
Yeah. So yeah, it's produced for us. That spot has for sure, but to get it on more of a regular basis, and not even so much with harvesting, but having the encounters. I think we went a lot of years there where we just weren't even really seeing deer, does and fawns, let alone bucks, and maybe young bucks, let alone mature bucks that we might want to shoot. There's a couple of years there where we just really weren't having those encounters, and then we transitioned into a couple of years where we got better and we started having those encounters, and now it feels like we've put ourselves in a position where maybe we can have those encounters and then also turn those into harvests.
Yeah, for sure. And part of it too is not having those encounters. You know, it, it's hard to harvest a matured buck. Like they're they made it through a season or two or three or however many, for a reason, and they get that much smarter. And um, just personally, back on it now, this is the first harvest in several years there. But last year I had a golden opportunity at shooting a buck even bigger than this one ended up being. But my to some extent my lack of experience with encounters there, and just how prepared you need to be in those situations. We just didn't have that experience there before. So it also took a couple of failures on my part, and learning from those, to ultimately be able to harvest a decent buck.
Yeah, yeah, that's another good point. But then, I mean, obviously, we have these improvements that we've made over the years and the trials and tribulations, and it all kind of led into this past weekend here. Well, I mean, I should say that we're just starting with this season. Um, we could even go back to the summertime. Um, I don't know about you, but I kind of had a more negative feeling on this summer than I had previous years. I feel like we had a lot more bucks showing up throughout the summer, especially towards the end of summer, like August into September, when they kind of start making that switch over to their fall ranges. I felt like we had much better years in the past couple of years than we did this year. So I was a little bit discouraged based on trail camera pictures this summer.
For sure. Yeah, and we have the evidence of that and our save photos and those kinds of things. But yeah, we've had many years where more bucks and bigger bucks and those bachelor groups coming in and hanging out and being around fairly regularly and really just building up that excitement for the upcoming season. Like, we got these deer around and we didn't have much of that this summer. You're 100% right. It was a sporadic, you know, mature buck that would come through occasionally, or some smaller bucks that are cruising through in groups that we might see that, there's some signs of life and this and that, but there was not a ton um, of positive sign for sure on the cameras this summer.
Well, the buck that you ultimately shot, that since then I think we've affectionately named Lowrider. Um, he was like the only one to me that when he showed up on camera, I knew exactly which buck that was. Whereas
Right.
I feel like if one showed up on our cameras tonight, even if he had been there at another time throughout the summer, I wouldn't really know which one it was. I'd have to go and look back and try to match it up because I feel like Lowrider was the only one that showed up regularly enough to where you could really pinpoint, okay, that's the same buck. And he wasn't super regular, but he was the most regular out of all of them to where we could recognize him at least.
For sure. Yeah, and like you said, there'd be some random mature bucks that would come through, like, oh, well, is that this 10, or is that a bigger 8 or whatever, and just not enough information to you know print them out and put on the wall and name the whole herd. We certainly didn't have any opportunity to do that.
No, we definitely did not. But so then that kind of paints the picture leading into opening weekend. I don't think we were really, going into opening weekend the way that some guys would be, where they have a shooter that is coming into the same stand, getting its picture taken on the same trail camera every day at the same time, and they're kind of going in on an ambush mission. I know for a lot of people that's their early season situation, but I think for us it was more so like, well, we haven't really seen a ton here on the cameras. Obviously, they don't tell the whole story, but for the most part, it's a safe bet that we're not just littered with mature bucks. So I think we were really in there opening weekend to maybe try to shoot a doe.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was certainly on the table, to do that and to start to manage that herd a little bit, because that's something that you know we haven't done much of either in the past. But I think an important part of that, before getting into just that opening weekend, is um, that the property really isn't one that has ever had mature bucks living there, that we could say for sure that, oh, hey, well, Larry lives here and that's why we see him so often. It's There's a lot of of good land around there that those bucks can live in, and we've it's been more of a summertime spot for them down there, but we never have those bucks that live on the property, so it's a matter of um, trying to create the situation where when they come through, or getting them to come through with water holes and food plots and those kinds of things, and be in the right place at the right time, because we're not just going to probably ever be able to just start to name those bucks that live on the property and get them timed out to just go to a stand and harvest them.
Yeah, that is a good point. I think Albert, when we had those run-ins with him, was living on the property for like 1 week or 2 weeks, maybe, or 10 days. I think he truly was like essentially living there. But aside from that, you're right. We really are never going into a season or even going into a weekend saying, okay, this buck is living here right now. He's showing up every single day at the same time. We just have never had that.
Yeah, I know. I think you're right about Albert, because he was definitely a regular for a while there, so he might have taken up residence.
Yeah, but yeah, for the most part, it's more of a transitional area, and we can have periods of time where we're seeing different bucks or even the same buck, using that property on a fairly regular basis. But for whatever the reason was this summer, and I don't think we put like a ton of pressure on it this summer. Certainly, I don't know if there was just too many does and fawns living there that they didn't like it. I mean, it is pretty thick in there, and I know during the summer when they have their velvet on, they don't like to be in those super thick areas. But then, come late August, early September, when they're shedding their velvet, you would think that they would make that switch then to those thicker areas, which for the past maybe 2 or 3 years was happening for us. And then this year it just didn't. So I don't know what happened there, but it wasn't looking good.
It was not looking good, and furthermore, it was the area where we are able to hunt there also was declared a D4 drought area this summer. So going into that opening weekend, it hadn't rained, I don't know, 3/10 of an inch maybe within the last month or something, around the property. So that certainly, you know, I'm sure changed some of the things, some of the patterns, for the deer. Certain crops weren't growing as well, or food plots didn't come up, or water sources dried up, and they had to move on. So um, it certainly it certainly did change things. And then we roll into town, and next thing you know, we get rain.
Yeah,
We get
that
rain on
was
that.
that was by far the worst part of opening weekend was that rain that I remember going into it, we were like, well, we're not going to miss opening weekend. We're going to be there. And I would say like 10 days up to 7 or 8 days beforehand, no rain in the forecast. And then as it started to get a little bit closer, you texted me that there was rain in the forecast, and I hadn't seen it at all. So then I look at that and I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. That kind of sucks, but whatever. And then fast forward to like 3, 2, 1 days before, that had all gone away. So then there was no rain in the forecast.
Yeah. Yeah, we thought we were just going to be, high and dry, warm temperatures, for which is, we can expect that in mid-September. It was going to be warm, but we certainly weren't worried about rain spoiling our hunt. That's for sure.
Right. And I didn't see any deer that morning. I don't think you did either, but I know we each bumped some on our way in. I had does and fawns blowing at me like crazy on my walk in.
Yeah, and I did too. I had deer blowing at me, and um, not enough where I heard them scurry away or anything, but they certainly knew I was there and heading in. But yeah, I don't that morning. Yeah, I don't think we laid eyes on any deer.
No, and then, we back out of there and go and have lunch at one of the places that we used to go quite often when we had access on another piece of private over there. Um, and then, I mean, if you would have asked me at like 1 p.m. if it was going to rain that night, I still would have told you no. I don't even know if the radar was telling you that it was going to rain at 1, but by 2, it was raining.
Yeah, yeah, it certainly was. And um, and then it, it started to rain. We're at the house, and not raining terribly hard, but you still got all your stuff there, and you're gonna go climb up in a tree, and how many hours do you want to sit in the rain before it stops? So, we're keeping an eye on the radar, and like, oh, well, it looks like maybe it's going to rain for another 20 minutes or so. And then, there's going to be a little break, and then it's going to rain for, maybe another 45 minutes, maybe an hour tops or something like that. So, we made our plan to go in there and hunker down for that afternoon hunt. But it didn't quite turn out to be just a 45-minute rain.
No, I think originally when we were like, all right, well, it's going to be 45 minutes. Let's get dressed and, get everything to the truck. That'll take us half an hour. Drive to the property. It'll take us a minute and a half. But then, the walk in, get set up in the stand. By that time, those 45 minutes will have passed and we'll be like set up, bows on the hangers, cameras on their stands, and everything like ready to go when the rain finally stops. And like you said, that certainly did not happen. I ended up getting in. I got to the tree stand that is set up on that water hole. Um, and I got up there and I'm seeing a considerable amount of lightning. And it's raining on me pretty hard. And I brought my rain jacket, which was a tremendous help, but it was not perfect at keeping everything dry. So I actually climbed that stand, sat up there, and was ready to just kind of hunker down, hoping it was going to pass through. And then eventually the rain and the lightning and everything got to be a little bit too much, where I was like, okay, I better climb down. And then I actually went and stood in that stand that you sat in this past weekend to shoot that buck. And I stood there with basically just the door open and all the windows closed for what ended up being like 3 hours.
Yeah, yeah, and while you were doing that, I climbed in a different elevated gun stand that I also used to bow hunt out of. That had a metal roof and metal sides. So, as you're seeing that lightning from up in your tree, I'm seeing that lightning from inside a metal box that's elevated above the ground. Um, so that was a little disconcerting, and beyond that, being in a thunderstorm for 3 hours under a tin roof, I felt like I was, I don't know, living inside of a popcorn popper or something. Not to mention, I also was sitting underneath an oak tree with acorns, which is a good thing. But with wind and rain, those acorns also make quite a bit of racket on that roof.
Yeah, so it kind of foiled our plan a little bit of getting in there and then the rain dying down and then, oh, the deer are going to be up on their feet, because to us on the radar, it would show rain's going to be over in 15 minutes. And I remember when I was sitting in that stand, I didn't really have enough service to check the radar, but I had enough service to send a text to you. And you ended up having somehow just enough service to check the radar. So you'd tell me 15 more minutes, those 15 minutes would go by, no change in the rain, it's still coming down. And I'd text you and be like, well, what's going on here? And then you'd say, 15 more minutes or another half an hour, whatever. And it just kept getting pushed longer and longer and longer until it ended up being like 3 hours.
Yeah, what ended up happening was we ended up being very close to the center of the low pressure system, and the rain just, instead of moving like it's typically going to do from west to east. It just kept circling around us and circling around us, and more rain would form and circle around us. Um, and just to add a little bit to that, so then I also had my dad, your grandpa, hunting a different piece of property, maybe 6 miles down the road, and he didn't have enough service for the radar either. So I was kind of the go between both of you, not really knowing what was happening and whether we needed to, get out of there, because there was a significant amount of lightning and thunder, and the clouds were black, and it was really just a matter of whether the wind was gonna um, pick up a bunch or not. And we thought it was going to be over, and we were going to be in our stands in plenty of time, and the deer would have plenty of time to come out and shake it off and start moving around, and we just got foiled. We ended up with maybe, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour at the end of the evening where it wasn't raining, but by that time, we figured it just didn't quit soon enough to get those deer on their feet before dark. At that point, they just waited another half hour, 45 minutes, and started milling around more at dark time.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. I think if it would have quit at like 4:30, we probably would have had some action that afternoon. But like you said, it didn't quit till 45 minutes, maybe an hour before shooting light. And at that point, they had been bedded down long enough, and the cover of darkness was coming soon enough, especially after we had bumped them that morning and caused the ruckus. I think they just decided they were going to call it a night, and that was it. And then, so I didn't see anything on opening day, and then the following day, that morning, I didn't see anything either. I think you maybe saw a fawn or something.
I think that was about it. Yeah, it might have been a fawn or a pair of fawns or something like that I ended up seeing. So, we didn't have super high expectations, but we had the feeling that, we're for sure gonna probably get opportunities at does, and there's a couple that need to be taken off of that property anyway. So I think we felt okay about that. But the way I also had early morning fog on those days as well. So between the fog and the thunderstorm, the whole opening weekend was kind of a dud.
Yeah, it wasn't great. And then to bridge that gap between opening weekend and this past weekend here, I had my normal work week, and then Friday night, I made the trip up to go and hunt with Jake, and we were covered up in does and fawns that whole night. And then the following night, I was no longer hunting with him, but he was out, and that's when he ended up shooting Junkie, which was a buck that he had on camera quite a bit throughout the summer, and it was definitely one of his top 3 target bucks for the year. So that was obviously another video that went out there that was super cool. So if you haven't seen that one is live at this point. So you should go check that one out. But that was, a cool weekend. I was glad I got to be at least a small part of that story there. But just a little bit of hunting for me, and then once again a normal work week, and then came into this past weekend. And I think you were probably out a couple times on public land closer to home throughout those 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, I got out maybe a couple of times each week, and um, nice public spot close to here, and we're out there. And again, not seeing a ton of deer, but a couple of mature bucks that had come through there. So sitting there with, somewhat decent hopes that I'd see something, and, about the same deal. I'd see a fawn or something like that. Never got to lay eyes on a buck. Didn't even get to see any turkeys. We've got turkey permits in a couple of different zones too at this time, and at the back of our minds, we're thinking, hey, we can at least maybe get one of those too, and nothing.
Yeah, no, and that public spot is covered up in turkeys. If you get pictures from cameras out there, you're likely to have a greater chance at seeing a picture of turkeys than you are deer.
For sure, for sure. And they just disappeared. There's a couple of stands of woods around there that they roost in and mill around in, and I guess they took the 2 weeks off from that spot and we're somewhere else.
Yeah, so it was just slow in general. But then, fast forward to this past weekend and looking at the weather once again, there was never any rain in the forecast, and luckily we didn't end up with any. But it was going to be ungodly hot, like
Yeah.
85 degrees, and we knew that all along. That was not a surprise. It was kind of interesting as the week rolled on, and you got to see further and further into the future on the forecast. Um, and looking at this weekend that we're about to have, where it's like a 30-degree drop in temperature between like 2 days. It's going to drop like 10 degrees and then another 20 degrees. Um, so kind of looking at that and going, oh boy, that is like the textbook prime weekend to get yourself out in the woods. What should we do about this weekend where it's going to be 85? Should we be going out? Should we just wait and keep the pressure off till the next weekend? What do we do?
Yeah, and I just just looking around at even some other buck fever guys or other people that we know that are bow hunters. Most of them took most or all of last weekend off due to those high temperatures. It was just probably wouldn't we certainly wouldn't call it an ideal weekend to be out in the bow woods. That's for sure.
No, but we had seen plenty of pictures of, those does and fawn groups that were showing up still throughout the week. So I think it was almost like going into it thinking it was going to be like a reset of what opening weekend should have been, where it was going to be a little bit warm, but we didn't think it was going to rain, and we thought we'd have a good chance at some does and fawns. I think that was my mentality going into it, was still not necessarily expecting to have, bucks roaming around like crazy, but hopefully just a decent weekend to have a shot at a doe.
Yeah, and it was maybe we shoot a couple of does this weekend, and then it's going to be all set up for us to sit tight on some bucks coming in with this cold weather that's coming up this weekend.
Yeah, exactly. And then that kind of leads into one of the cooler details of the the video and the story from this past weekend is that I want to say it was at about 12:38 in the morning, so just after midnight. We had that 10 pointer lowrider show up on one of our trail cameras, and we hadn't seen him, nor had we seen even a single buck on any of our trail cameras for 2, 3, 4 weeks between there, and he just shows up shortly after midnight, and we didn't even know it until we woke up to go hunt on Saturday morning.
Yeah, 5 a.m. alarm, and I know one of the first things I always do. It's probably the first thing I do after I turn my alarm off is go to that Spy Point app and see what's been going on and where overnight, and that was quite a nice surprise to see him show up there at a little after midnight, and then gives you it gave us some real hope, for that day. But at the same time, it's the time of year that these bucks they're moving around, whether they're in their groups or they're starting to sniff out does or whatever. And so even though we saw them, on that camera, certainly wasn't a guarantee that we were going to be seeing them again, you know, over the weekend or even for a while, the way that the pictures have been working out.
Right. I think that was a good way of putting it. I think we saw the picture and still we're sticking with the status quo. Like, plan doesn't change. We're still in here hopefully for a couple of does, but cautiously optimistic that maybe we'd have an encounter, or like you said, with the cold front coming up, maybe that just means that he's going to be around and available for that following weekend.
Right. Yep. 100%.
So then obviously we head out there, and I saw my first deer of the season on that property. Doe and two fawns came in like maybe 3 minutes after I had the camera set up. So like I finally got everything set up, situated. I'm sat down, quiet, not moving. Kind of at that point where it's still so dark, you're just fighting the urge to fall back asleep. And I could just kind of feel the presence, like you sometimes can, where you're like, it just you feel it. And sure enough, I had them at like 10 yards, and they popped out. This is like 15, 20 minutes before we have camera light, so I filmed the whole thing. There's 0 seconds of usable footage, which is also why I didn't take a shot. There was plenty of opportunities where I could see that it was a mature doe, and I could have taken the shot, but to get the pin on there, it wasn't right. Wouldn't have been ethical. So that's why there was no shot there. But I had that encounter that morning, and then I ended up having a second encounter in daylight, which will be in the video. There's plenty of usable footage with that same group that morning, and still no shot. Didn't quite get that to happen, but it was good that I actually saw a couple deer for a change. And I think that morning you also had a couple encounters.
Yeah, and in fact, that was something that had me actually a little bit negative coming back in after the morning sit, because I had a doe and a couple of fawns, as it turned out, come right down the waterway. I could hear them, maybe 20 yards away from the stand, and I got the camera out and I got the camera on, and what turned out to be two fawns. They just kind of trotted right in front of my stand, probably 7 yards in front of my stand. So it gave me a great look, and I thought, boy, at least I got him on camera, and um, we end up going back to the house later that day and looking through footage, and some, which I will look to in the video. Maybe, I'm not sure if it'll make the cut, but
It'll be in there.
I'm not a great. I don't claim to be a great cameraman or a great hunter, but I thought I could at least get those three deer that were 7 yards away from me on camera, and as it turns out, I could not. So I did see those deer, and but that wasn't the coolest encounter for me that morning. We actually had something really neat happen that morning,
Yeah.
and that was we've had a bobcat, a resident bobcat that we've had on camera over the last several years, but maybe only it started off being a time or two, maybe a year, that we would get this thing on camera, like, oh, cool, bobcats here. Um, and then last year, sitting in the stand, I actually laid eyes on the bobcat. I was sitting there, and he took one little hop into the trail, and then one more hop into the corn, and so I got eyes on him for maybe 2 seconds, which I thought was pretty cool. But then last weekend on Saturday morning, that little sucker, he was trying to sneak through, and he went through the food plot, and milled around by the water hole a little bit, and I was lucky enough to get him on camera for more than a minute. So for me, got to be honest, if that's all that would have happened last weekend, I would have been happy as a lark, because we'd never been able to really get much footage at all, and just to be in the woods and see an animal like that with your own eyes, that most people don't get that opportunity. I mean, my weekend was pretty made already, just by having that bobcat encounter.
Yeah, for sure. That was pretty sweet. I've never seen him in person, but like you said, I feel like he's been there as long as we've hunted that property. We've had, maybe it started with one or two pictures a year, and then it's gotten increasingly more common to see him on camera. I feel like this year he's been on camera more than ever. And then obviously, your encounter with him sort of solidifies that. Like, this is the most we've seen of him, and like you said, just being so rare and most people not really getting to see one like that, that's been super cool.
Yeah, and we've even gathered, a little bit more information on him because before I was able to film him, he was at a licking branch site that we have pictures, cameras on, and I think both of us are pretty sure that the picture that we have of him there is of him getting a squirrel. He's down on the ground, and it looks like he's got a squirrel that he's wrestling with, but because he's moving and the squirrel's moving, it's not totally clear, but we're pretty sure he was there hunting. And then, and even since then, we got another picture of him carrying food in his mouth by that water hole. So, and I say him, I have no idea if it's a male or a female bobcat, um, but yeah, just being able to see him and know that we're sharing the woods with an animal like that, that's a pretty cool deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And somebody who watches the video maybe would be able to tell the difference between a male or a female bobcat, and maybe leave a comment and let us know. Um, but the reason I feel like he would probably be more likely to be a male is assuming that's the same one that we've had over and over and over again. There's never any babies. And I feel like, if it was a female, there's a higher chance that it would be, searching to get bred whenever bobcats breed and having babies with it and whenever. So that kind of leads me to believe that it's a lone male that's just kind of off doing his own thing. I don't really know, but that would be my best guess.
Well, if I ever get close enough to him, I'll just lift up one of his back legs and find out for sure.
Yeah, I hope you don't get that close to him, because that would mean he's probably in your tree.
That's that's true. Yeah.
But
So,
you had a kind of a rare altogether weekend of sightings, because you saw something kind of rare before that, and then we went to get lunch after the bobcat sighting, and then you saw that same critter again.
yeah. And I think we'd been talking about it at different times, and um, how rare it is these days that we see a fox. And driving over that weekend on Friday evening, I was maybe halfway between home and where we hunt, and I'll be darned if a beautiful fox runs out across the road, plenty far in front of me, and um, so already I thought, wow, this seeing stuff that we don't typically see, um, and then had the bobcat that morning, and then we go and grab lunch, and we're driving back, and totally different part of the state, and sure enough, we're driving along, and they're like, oh, there's a cat, and it takes off, back across the road. Nope, it's a second fox. So it's Saturday morning or Saturday by noon, and already by that time in the last 18 hours, I'd got to see two foxes and a bobcat. So it was off to a heck of a start.
Yeah, I don't quite know the math on the rarity of that, but I would think that to see two separate foxes and a bobcat in 18 hours like that has to be, statistically speaking, a pretty rare phenomenon to occur. Um,
Yeah, I would think so.
yeah, and then when you factor in the way that the rest of the weekend goes, especially with our track record of shooting deer at all, but shooting bucks, you had a pretty rare weekend there. But I think we should kind of get into it. I know my Saturday night I saw that doe and two fawns once again, before all of this other stuff happened. Um, Once again, no shot. But then the exciting part.
Yeah, and we got back into the woods plenty early. It was I know it was before 3 o'clock that we were sitting there. It might have been 2:45 or something.
Yeah,
Um, and I crawled into that stand, and again, it's mid 80s. Um, there's I'm in an enclosed stand, with one opening that I'm using, and I, literally sat there staring out that one window for almost 4 hours, roasting, sweating, and not really seeing a thing, and then things got a little bit exciting. I I about 6:40 ish, I guess. Um, I could see out through an opening. I could see a deer out in the field, not on our property, but on the adjoining property, where there was corn that had been chopped not that long ago, and I saw a deer, and immediately grabbed the binoculars and put them in the binoculars, and I saw antlers, and I didn't see it, what kind of antlers, how big they were. But I was like, that's an adult deer, and that's a buck. And just as quickly as I had grabbed the binoculars, I set them back down, and I reached over to grab the crossbow and get that ready just in case. And by the time I looked back up, in the matter of those 2 seconds, that deer had come through the funnel, right into the food plot that we've got there, and started moving towards me. And he, as you're going to see in the video, he got past the brush that was there, and presented himself, and I was pretty certain that was lowrider as soon as he got into the opening. So, and then that's when the fun starts, I guess. But he moved in, pretty. He wasn't running; he was just walking at a steady pace, and came in there into the food plot. And by the time I, identified him, uh, and was ready, he stopped right, 45 yards away from me. And in between the stand and the food plot, there's one tree, and it's maybe a 8-inch in diameter tree, not a big tree. Um, and he stops right there. And in the video, it doesn't appear this way, but from the angle that I was sitting at, he stopped in the one that 8-inch diameter tree was covering, where his heart and lungs are. And, so I could see plenty of rump, and I could see plenty of his neck and head and antlers, and I couldn't get a shot. And, I was at the point, and of course it was only, I don't know if it was 2 seconds or 5 seconds or how long he stood there, but it was to the point where I was like, well, I think I can sneak a bolt, just to the right of that tree, and get where I need to be on that deer to make a good shot. And, I was considering that. And, by the time that I worked that out and was considering taking that shot, he started to move again. And, you know, he took 2 steps maybe, and at that point, I was thinking, gosh, am I going to have to take a shot at this deer while he's walking, or am I going to try to make a little bleat at him, or grunt. I had a grunt tube there too to stop him, and by maybe that third step, as he was heading to the water hole, he stopped and stopped broadside for me, and 45 45 yards away. And I felt pretty good about the shot. I put in a little bit more practice this year, and had the distances right and had my pins right, and took the shot, and felt pretty decent about it. And when I did, I thought I heard it hit, and it sounded a little hollow, like it got into that rib cage area where it needed to be. And um, he took 1 or 2 bounds into the brush, and that was the last that I saw of him for that time. So, um, and then it's the unknown, right? One, did I hit him good? Did he get on film? Did he, right? And we got 15 minutes before it gets dark, and then after that, it's give you a text.
Yeah. So I mean, that really illustrates too, like the purpose of that water hole in there too. Obviously, who knows? Maybe he was coming into that specifically. Maybe he wasn't. Based on the way he was moving, my guess is he probably wasn't. But when he got to that point, and that water hole is right there, because we placed it in that funnel like that, they're pretty much going to stop at it every time they go through there, because why not? It's a chance to get a quick drink and, then move on with the rest of their day. And so just that little bit where they're stopping and going towards that water hole, is specifically the reason why you have that there, because it can end up giving you that chance at a shot. So it pretty much worked out to be the textbook situation for how you'd like that to go.
100%. When he walked in, he was not walking towards that water hole. He was walking straight down the food plot, and he stopped, and at that point he's just, started to he had to change his angle about 45 degrees to go over and check out that water hole, and I'm convinced, and you'll see in the video too, I'm convinced that he was heading directly to that water hole at that point to get a little drink on his way by. So had he not done that, I'm stopping him. He's quartering towards me. He's not providing nearly as good a shot um, as he did. So that water hole was the key.
Right. So I actually saw, as I was standing there, I was texting back and forth with you, texting back and forth with Gabby and with Jake. All separate conversations, but Gabby's asking me what we're seeing, kind of going back and forth with Jake about what everybody's seeing, and he said he hadn't seen anything, and he probably wasn't going to shoot a doe at that point. And then, I asked him if he was going to go out Sunday, and he said no, so he was done for the weekend. I knew Colby and Eli weren't out, so I'm kind of sitting there almost a little bit discouraged at that point, thinking like, okay, well, from a buck fever content standpoint, like this is it. Like it's gonna be on you and me to try and get something here to have our next video. And literally right as all that's going on, I get a picture from the water hole, and then I get a text, and I didn't know that it was a picture from the water hole, and I felt my phone buzz telling me it was a text, but I didn't know who it was from. It could have been from a couple of different people, so I didn't check it right away. And then I eventually did pull my phone out of my pocket, take a look at it, and that's when I saw, oh, it's a trail camera picture from the water hole, and you were the one who texted me. So I thought, okay, well, that's probably something here. I didn't necessarily know that was going to be a buck that just went down. I thought, well, maybe at the very least, it's a doe that came by, and who knows? Maybe it's on its way to me. So then I open up the text from you, because it's going to take forever to load the picture from the water hole. And you said shots fired, and then I'm like, okay, well, I wonder what that was at. And then you said, I think I just stuck that 10-pointer, and then whatever. And so then I ended up calling you, and I ended up trying to look at the picture from the trail camera, and it turns out you couldn't see anything in it. I don't know if it was just the arrow as it went by that it triggered it, or something happened. I think we had it pointed too far upwards, and we didn't have it kind of in the right position after we had adjusted it earlier that weekend. So I don't know what was going on with it, but it ended up not being anything, but still being something all at the same time. But once I got those texts from you, then I just called you right away, and the excitement was super high, and we were kind of going back and forth, and you seemed to feel pretty good about your shot and everything. And so you convinced me to sit tight until dark, because there was still more deer out in the field milling around and whatever. And so I did sit tight, and I ended up not seeing anything, not really caring that I didn't see anything, obviously, because I had bigger fish to fry here. I had other things in my mind. But I darkness rolled around, and I packed up just about as quick as I could and started heading your way to at least go and try to find first blood. I think that was really our thought process there. We weren't trying to find him at that point. We were just trying to find first blood.
Yeah, and again, you think you make a good shot, and even I think I heard it hit a in the rib cage area somewhere, and whatever. But obviously, you don't know any of that until you start looking around, and so you got there, and we edged our way over there, and again, it was only 45 yards, so we just kind of to work our way over there and had flashlights and such, and looked around, and um, there wasn't any blood right where I thought the shot was, and it didn't take maybe 30 seconds or a minute of looking around, and we finally saw that first spot of blood, and obviously when that happens, um, then the dynamics change a little bit. Then you're onto something. So we started sniffing around a little bit more right in that grassy area, and all right, we got another spot here. Oh, there's another spot right here, but nothing major.
But
That's for
literally,
sure.
literally, right within those 5 yards, like from where if I stood where we started the track job and you stood where we inevitably ended it that first time, we could have reached out and touched each other's hands.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We didn't have a big search area because frankly, where the shot occurred and the direction that the deer bounded after that, was in a very confined space there. With some brush behind it too. So we didn't have a ton of different directions to look, but we found those first couple of spots of blood, and at that point, we started to scan a little bit with the flashlight just inside this little, this treed area, scanning around, and I think you were the first one. You're like, hey, flash back there. I think I saw eyes, and sure enough, I adjusted the flashlights and adjusted our position a little bit to be able to see in that direction just a little bit better, and he turned his head, and then we could see both eyes, and see his antlers, and see him laying down in there. So he at that point, and so this is what, a half hour, 45 minutes maybe after the shot, half hour, I guess.
Yeah,
um, and he had only traveled what, 15 yards from where the shot occurred, and that's where he
maybe
had laid down.
at
It might
most.
not be that many. Yeah.
Literally
Um,
on camera, you can see like if you watch the video where you can no longer see him is exactly where he went down. Like the last moment where you can see his tail in the video, you can't see him anymore because he went down literally right there. Like he took 3 steps and went down.
yeah, and
And to add to the flashlight situation, um, I was kind of thinking after I was like, "Hey, put that back up," and I feel like he kind of looked at me funny, and then a separate time I told you to put the flashlight back up, and you kind of looked at me funny. I was like, "Jesus Christ, what's going on here with this guy?" Watching the footage back now that I took, I kept calling it the camera. So I told you multiple times, "Hey, put your camera back up." Meaning put your flashlight back up, but for whatever,
sure.
like, because I was behind the camera, I think it was goofing me to where like my mind was just kind of racing at this point, and I'm like thinking about the camera because I'm holding the camera in my hands, trying to get the words out telling you to put the flashlight up, but what came out was, hey, put your camera back up, and you had a flashlight in your hands, not a camera. So I think that's where you kind of at least had like a half a second of like, what? Oh, flashlight. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
But
that was goofy, but
yeah, and in the moment, I have no recollection of you telling me to put a camera up. So, just as scrambled as your brains were thinking, The flashlights, the camera, my brain was scrambled enough that I didn't even put two and two together that you were telling me I had a camera. So, the excitement of it all is, and a lot of it comes down to we haven't had a lot of experience there, and there we're sitting in a real good spot at that point where we've got blood, we've got eyes on the deer. Um, and so, again, we kind of had to move around a little bit because there were just little pockets where we could get the light in through where he was laying there, and so, wiggled around a little bit to get the flashlight on him, and then he popped up and got up. He was not healthy. Kind of stumbling, staggering a little bit. Um, Goes just out of this little clump of trees that we have, and we saw him walk through an opening, because there's a little bit of light left. He had a mostly full moon that weekend, and so we could see him go through and not walking very well at all, and probably made it 20, 25 yards something, and we heard him crash down again. So at that point, I think we made the right decision, to just back out, and um, we decided to just go back to the house and look at the footage, see what kind of shot, maybe if any. First of all, did I even get it on camera? And then see if we could tell where he was hit, and regroup from there.
Yeah, and we felt great when we found first blood, and then I think we kind of, when that all happened, felt a little bit, maybe a little bit more discouraged. But like, to describe what it was like when he was laying there, he had his head picked up. He, was moving his head around. He wasn't dead, but we had to get within like 5 yards of him before he even tried to move to get up. So he obviously knew right where we were, but he was silent and like wasn't getting up. But then when we flashed, had the flashlight on him, that's what triggered him to get up, but he couldn't. It was the two thoughts that crossed my mind were that he was either stuck, because I know there's some barbed wire fence there that's partially up, partially down. So I thought maybe he's either stuck, like wrapped up in that to where he wants to get up, but he can't. And that's why he went down right there. He would have ran 100 yards maybe, but he got caught up in the barbed wire, went down, and he's stuck, so he can't get back up. Or maybe you shot him like in the shoulder blade, and he's got a broken leg, so he went down right there and can't get up because he was like trying to get up, couldn't. Finally, he does, and then like you said, he could only make it. He could only muster up 20 yards, and then he went back down. And as we ended up going back there and finding out, he wasn't caught in anything. It was nothing like that. Also, when we looked at the shot, it wasn't a shoulder shot. He literally was just in that rough a shape. He was moments from death. He just couldn't get up.
Yeah, and during that time too, we were looking to maybe put another bolt in him to put him out of his misery. You don't want to see an animal suffer for any longer than they have to, and just the way that he was laying in there, he was laying pretty much body going away from us, and there was no way to wiggle around in there to try to get an ethical kill shot in on him. So that was certainly our first intention once we laid eyes on him, like, hey, can we get him put out of his misery here as quickly as we can? And by that time, he staggered away. So we go back and look at the footage and regroup and later and a little bit more help, and then the waiting game. I tell you, that was probably the longest 45 minutes or hour I've had in quite some time.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, looking back on it now, I think had I showed up at your stand 5 minutes later, I think we would have found him dead right there. Um, but then going back and looking at the footage and everything, and you got perfect footage and you made a perfect shot. So I remember when we first watched through that and saw the shot, we both just reacted immediately like, "Yep, he's dead. He's dead." It was a celebration. Like we knew he was gone. It wasn't a bad shot at all. It was perfect. and we both knew he was dead. And that really solidified things for me that, kind of what we thought we heard, where he got up, ran 20 yards, and we thought we heard him crash back down again. That really solidified it for me, where I was like, yeah, that's too good of a shot. I bet we're going to find him dead right where we last heard him crash.
Yeah, and as it turns out, that's exactly what happened. I mean, he was. I think if I would have given you a map of that section of the property and had you put an X where you think he was going to be laying dead, um, that's exactly where he was at. He, like I said, another 20 yards or so, and that's a pretty cool feeling to. Us, and we kind of snuck in there. Obviously, we don't know he's dead. We took our time going back in there. We went to the first spot where we saw him, and what kind of blood do we have here? Because there's no guarantees. I mean, we thought it was a good shot. We thought, right, all of that stuff, but still, there's no guarantees in that. So we went to check, and we found where he was laying, and there's pretty substantial blood there. And at that point, we're like, we saw him, where he walked last across, so let's go out there and take a look. And we got out to the field edge and shined the flashlight down the first row of cut corn there, and there he was. So
Yeah, that was a cool moment. That was the first time in a long time that we were walking up to a dead deer on that property, let alone a dead buck, and one of the nicer ones that we had, like our main guy, pretty much. One of the shooters.
yeah, yeah, and then at that moment, it's a little bit hard because at that point too, and that was maybe 8:45, let's say, in that area. And at that time it's still probably 80 degrees,
Yep.
maybe. And so there's a little bit of time for excitement and emotion and that kind of stuff, but honestly there wasn't a whole bunch of time for it, because we knew that if we're gonna preserve meat and get this deer taken care of the way it needs to get taken care of, you know, honestly, that was kind of just the start of our evening.
Yeah, for sure. That was the biggest part, was finding them, but we knew that from there, the work was really going to begin. And one of the first things when we ended up gutting him out was trying to figure out where you did end up hitting him. Trying to find the heart and the lungs and see what actually got hit. So I remember when we finally got them all gutted out, you ended up hitting part of the heart and you hit, I think, both lungs. So I really have no idea how that deer ended up living for. I mean, he probably lived for 20 minutes after the shot, maybe 25. I don't even think it was a full half an hour, just based on the timeline of it all. Maybe a half an hour, but really incredible that these deer have the strength on a shot heart and lungs. I mean, he only made it 15 yards, and then he only made it a couple more after that. But to still be kicking after getting hit like that, I don't know how he did it.
It's a real testament to you know the strength and abilities that those bucks have. And all of us have heard stories or seen stories of you know seeing a deer walk around with an arrow in it, or harvesting a deer, and inside of it you find a broadhead that from the year before, or something like that. And you're like, yeah, maybe, I guess that could happen or whatever. But when you take it down to that level and you're inspecting the organs and those kinds of things, and it really is a wow moment that those deer have that kind of ability to, that will to live. And that's something to certainly be respectful of. When we're hunting these animals, like they're not wimps. They're survivors, and it takes a good shot, and it takes a real good effort to be able to harvest one.
Yeah, for sure. And then, like you said, an even bigger effort after the harvest to preserve all the meat.
Yeah, and we're just lucky enough with you know your grandpa being right there with not only his knowledge, but the facilities and equipment and those kinds of things that we had at our disposal. Really was about the only way that we were going to be able to ensure that we kept the meat in pristine condition. So we brought the gator down, and it sure was nice only having to drag that deer about, I don't know, 20 yards, 15 yards or something from where he went down to where we're able to load him up in the back of that gator. And took him back to the farm. We took time to take a couple pictures out in the field, but again, we just didn't feel like we had a whole ton of time to waste at that point. So got him back to the farm, and uh, you know laid him out, washed him out good, and had access to a machine to get him up and lifted up and cleaned out. And again, then we took a few more pictures at that point, and then it was time to really get to work. And both of us got a good lesson again with Papa's experience, and the number of deer that he's processed. We made the decision that the best thing that we could do is not parade them around and just pack them with ice and go here and there and show people and whatever. The time was now to get us get them skinned and get them cleaned up and get them quartered and get them into a freezer just as soon as we can. So that was more or less the next 2 or 3 hours of our evening.
Yeah, yeah, at least. And like you said, I mean, we've needed them on some track jobs and dragging deer out and whatever, and it was less of that this time. But this was the most labor intensive process after the harvest that we've needed his help and expertise on. Getting that meat preserved. So we're definitely very lucky to have him, and like you said, his expertise and knowledge in that, and the facilities and the equipment to be able to do it. Because even if they hadn't been there, if it was just the two of us trying to do that, we probably would have had to pack them with ice and try to get them home. I would think, to try and get them into a freezer or something.
Yeah, and it would have been doable. I think we'd have probably headed into town and got a couple 100 pounds of ice and packed them inside and packed them outside, and all that kind of stuff, and maybe we're able to get them somewhere that next day to be taken care of. But ultimately, I think we made the right decision, um, and now we're gonna have a good healthy amount of fresh venison to enjoy, which is really the whole point.
Yeah, for sure. I know I'm looking forward to getting that processed. I know we've got a plan in place to bone it out and get a couple of roasts and steaks and whatever out of it this weekend, because it is, all in a freezer, being cooled down right now. So this weekend when we go back up there to hunt, we're going to be processing all that. So I'm looking forward to having some of that venison coming up here, but also still plenty of season left to come here to try and put some more on the ground.
Yeah, and one more, detail about that evening. So we go back to the farm, we look at the footage, we're getting packed up, we're all dressed, we got our boots on, we're making our plan to head out there and get a trail camera notification.
Yeah.
And probably I don't know, I guess maybe 150 yards at the most from where I shot that buck, probably less. Um, Probably one of the might be the biggest deer we've got on camera so far this year.
This
Just
year, yeah, this year for sure.
just a giant 10 pointer that at least that we can make out. He was behind a tree with the picture. So, here it is, maybe an hour and a half since I had shot that one, and we got another even much bigger buck that shows up on camera. So, um, we were pretty excited about that, and it gives us even that much more hope for this coming weekend,
Yeah, it was
the rest of the season.
another weird little detail there where like we talked about seeing that the buck you shot at midnight the night before we went out there. Now all of a sudden this one shows up. I think we hit the woods at like, or we had left the house maybe at 8:11, and the deer was on the trail camera at 8:15 or something. So like, just missed them by 4 minutes or something being there. Um, and one we had never seen before. Just like the timing and the rarity and just the weirdness of the things that happened last weekend. I don't know what was going on, but it was just so weird that all of those little details kind of happened the way that they did. But yeah, I mean, we only have the one picture of him, and like you say, he's behind a tree, and I'm not looking at it right now. But from what I remember, I probably would have put him as a 135 plus, maybe 140 inch straight 10 point, perfect with really nice G2s and G3s, and I think he had decent brow tines and everything, and a decent amount of mass. I mean, that was a really, really, really nice buck and a huge body. I feel like he was fat.
Yeah, yeah, he is a big boy, and the nice thing is he's still out there. So, it's we don't have to worry about lowrider anymore. We got that job done, and now we still got some other ones on the hit list, and we're gonna enlist your brother back in the woods, get him out of his working schedule, um, and get you back up in there, and feeling pretty good about the rest of the season. I mean, the best part of the season is yet to come.
Yeah, for everybody, but especially on that property, that's undoubtedly the best time of year that we have is like mid to late October.
Yeah,
So we're kind of coming up on that, plus a 30-degree cold front this weekend. With bucks starting to show up much more regularly than they had been. I know I'm pretty optimistic looking into the next couple of weeks of hunting here.
for sure. It's nice to have one under our belt. It's been a while. And now we're just gonna keep building on that. And I think it's part of the natural progression of all the work that's been put to that property, all of the knowledge that you've gained and shared with me and shared with us, over the last couple of years. Having Pat on the team, and Eli and Jake and Terry, and all of their experiences and what they do. And I know I've been learning from it, and trying to incorporate some of that into what I do in the woods. And know you have too. And it's paid some dividends already this year, which is fantastic. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity uh, to really cash in more on all that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, I think that about sums up the story of Lowrider.
I think it does. There's it's quite a story, and I'm sure over time we're going to think of more stuff and more details, and more things that happened, and maybe we'll have an occasion, maybe at the end of this season, when we look back on it, maybe we can touch base on a couple other things.
Yeah, that'd be sweet. And hopefully there's more bucks and more details to hash out when it's all said and done as well.
I feel pretty good about it. I think it's your turn next.
Yeah, I hope so. I know I'm going to give it a good shot.
yeah, and and just to wrap it up, the best part for me, is always just being in the woods with you, being in the woods with your brother. And mom comes out with us sometimes, and having papa around there to help. So, you know, I couldn't be more happy and more blessed to be able to share the woods with you guys. And I was really lucky this time. And now I'm ready to really celebrate. That's the thing. I hear you talk with these other guys about what's your your celebration drink and your whatever. We didn't get to celebrate. We we shot that sucker, and we got into the house. I don't know if that was probably midnight or 12:15 by the time, we got in there and cleaned up a little bit. And I think we looked at each other and said, "Did we even have supper yet?" And the answer was no. We didn't have any of that. Uh, so I'm looking forward to the next time this season when we do have one of those celebratory moments, and we are definitely going to crack open a celebratory beer.
Yeah, I sure hope so. I know I let the rest of the Buck Fever crew know what was going down, and Jake asked if the Miller Lights were flying, and I said, "No, buddy, we've been cutting this thing up for like an hour and a half, and we got 2.5 hours ahead of us." And Eli said, beer is a standard cutting tool." And like I don't even we didn't even drink water. It's not like we were, drinking something other than beer. We just had it was no drinks, no water, no food, no nothing. It was just deal with the deer. And then, you know, wait until enough of the adrenaline had wore off by about 12:30, maybe 1 a.m. to where we could maybe get a couple hours of sleep and then just do it all over again.
Right back at it, 5 a.m.
Yeah, so hopefully somebody will shoot one, Saturday morning, and then we can have a little bit more time to celebrate.
Yeah, I'd vote for that.
Yeah, me too, 100%. So you heard it here first. That's the plan. Saturday morning, we're gonna try and put another one on the ground. But yeah, that was the story of Lowrider here. So even better than this podcast episode, although it to me, I think it was a very good episode. I know I enjoyed it, but to be able to see it and see all the footage from this weekend, the video is going to be coming out on the Monday at 5 o'clock following the release of this podcast episode here. So you're definitely going to want to stay tuned for that one. It's going to be a good one. Like I said earlier, I'm already into the editing phase of that. It's looking like it's going to be a pretty sweet video with a lot of footage. And I hope we were able to fill some of the gaps here and really tell the full story and do it all justice. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We really appreciate it. Hit the like button on this episode and stay tuned, not only for the video of Lowrider, but hopefully for many more videos to come yet this season. So thank you guys once again, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.